अस्सलामुअलैकुम, ईद मुबारक सबको। अब मैं आपको आज ईद की दिखाता हूँ। माशाल्लाह ये एक नाल मरकज़ में हो रही है और ये देखें बाहर बहुत सारे लोग बैठे हैं माशाल्लाह। ये देखें अल्लाहु अकबर अल्लाहु अकबर अल्लाहु अकबर। और ये रोड पे आज इजाज़त मिली है, अंदर पूरी मस्जिद भरी हुई है और उसके साथ जो है मोहम्मद जमील भाई, मोहम्मद साहब भाई कैसे हैं? तो माशाल्लाह कि हमारे भतीजे जो है शाम सिद्दीक़ की नमाज़ पढ़ाएंगे इंशाल्लाह। तो अब चलें, नमाज़ खड़ी हो रही है, हम एक दफ़ा पढ़ चुके हैं, दूसरी नमाज़ पढ़ रही है माशाल्लाह। थोड़ा सा एक मंदिर दिखा दें आपको एक मरतबा, और फिर ये शाम सिद्दीक़ इंशाल्लाह जो है नमाज़ पढ़ा रहे हैं। ईद मुबारक सबको।
سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده ليلا من المسجد الحرام إلى المسجد الأقصى. It's one of the few places in the Quran where a specific location is mentioned. And even the wording that's used, subhanAllah, talks about it, that glorious be to the one who took his servant Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam by night from the sacred mosque to the furthest mosque, Masjid al-Aqsa. Barakna hawlahu, our blessings have surrounded it. That's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes Masjid al-Aqsa, that it is surrounded by our blessings. So that we may show him some of our signs. And if we think about the history of Masjid al-Aqsa, Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, our beloved father, he built his family there. Ishaq alayhi salam, the Bani Israel comes from Yaqub alayhi salam. His father Ishaq was also based there, and then Yaqub alayhi salam raised his 12 sons there. That's where the 12 tribes of Israel came from. And then Maryam alayhi salam, from the family of Ali Imran, from Nazareth, from a city within this region. Where Dawud alayhi salam, in fact, Palestine was called, or Jerusalem was called the city of David. Sulaiman alayhi salam, his maqam, his place is still there. It's a place of great significance. Zakaria alayhi salam, his son Yahya alayhi salam, was born in Jerusalem. Isa alayhi salam was born in Bethlehem, which is maybe 15 minutes away from Jerusalem. But subhanAllah, I mentioned Bethlehem. Do you know that someone that was born 30 years ago in Bethlehem, which, as I mentioned, is 20 minutes away. 20 minutes away from Masjid al-Aqsa. But if a Palestinian were to be born in Bethlehem, and in fact, Palestinians that were born there in the last 20 to 30 years have never had the opportunity to visit Masjid al-Aqsa. Can you imagine that? Being born 20 minutes away from one of our holiest sites, yet never being given the opportunity, never being allowed because of the occupation that you live under. That's the state of the Muslims that are over there. They can't even visit their masjid that is 20 minutes away. And when you think about the difficult time that our beloved Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam faced when he went to Ta'if, when he was brutally stoned, when he was kicked out bleeding so much that his shoes were drenched in blood. And then shortly after that, how did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give him consolation? During his most difficult time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent him to Masjid al-Aqsa to meet the rest of the prophets. That is the blessing of that place. And it's being desecrated. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant them safety and security. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to return Masjid al-Aqsa to us, to return Masjid al-Aqsa to rightful Muslim ownership. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to not allow us to take it for granted once we have it. But how do we take consolation in this? Especially on this day of our celebration, right? Shouldn't it be a day of joy? Yes. Let's not take away from that. Let's celebrate today. Make sure you celebrate. Because we were given the blessing of Ramadan, we still had that. And so thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that opportunity. And celebrate the blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave to us. But that doesn't mean we stop thinking about, and we stop remembering, and we stop doing the work that needs to be done. I want to just point out one time from the life of our beloved. There's so many, but just one aspect. And this was, after the migration to Medina, when, again, the companions, the Muslims, as they were already a small group, they were a weak group. And then when they moved to Medina, they weren't a very rich group. In fact, they were struggling to eat. The Sahaba would have to split a date so that he could share it with his brother. They barely had water until Prophet ﷺ stood in the masjid and he did a fundraiser. And finally one of the Sahaba paid well over asking price, well over market price for a well, so that the Muslims could get some water to drink. And the following year when Ramadan came around, Nabi ﷺ said, okay, we're going to fast, we're going to pray Tarawih, we're going to get a chance to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And all throughout what's happening, there's skirmishes that are happening, raids that are happening, Meccans are coming. And in the middle of that month, what happens? An army of 1,000 strong, built, well-equipped soldiers from Mecca are now bearing down the neck of Medina. And who do we have at our side? 313 farmers, gardeners, barely enough equipment to stand up against them. In fact, there's a famous incident of Ukasha, who showed up with a stick in his hand. And the Prophet said, "Yeah, Ukasha, what are you going to do with this stick?" And he said, "I'm going to fight." And so Nabi took the stick, and it said, it's a Sahih narration, he waved it, and it became a sword, and he handed it back to Ukasha. And so this group of farmers and gatherers and gardeners went up against this well-established army. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that وَلَقَدْ نَصَرَكُمُ اللَّهُ بِبَدْرٍ وَأَنْتُمْ أَذِلَّةٌ, that we helped you, we gave you help during Badr when you were very weak. فَأَنزَلَ اللَّهُ سَكِينَتَهُ عَلَى رَسُولِهِ فَأَنزَلَ اللَّهُ سَكِينَتَهُ عَلَى رَسُولِهِ وَعَلَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent down tranquility upon them. And it said they literally felt so tranquil. Ibn Abbas narrates that he felt so tranquil that he fell asleep on the battlefield. And by the time they came to, by the time they woke up, the angels had already swept through the army. 70 of the leaders of Quraysh were lying on the floor dead. Another 70 tied up. And the rest of them running away with their tails between their legs. فَأَنزَلَ اللَّهُ سَكِينَتَهُ عَلَى رَسُولِهِ. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كَمْ مِنْ فِئَةٍ قَلِيلَةٍ غَلَبَتْ فِئَةً كَثِيرَةً بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. How many of a small group has overcome a much larger, with the idhn of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, with the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the hope that we need to continue to have. That doesn't mean we stop the work. That doesn't mean we stop donating. We have our duty. We still need to financially support however we can our brothers and sisters that are dying, that are being killed, that aren't allowed to pray in their own masjid peacefully. We still have our responsibility to do that. We still have our responsibility to boycott, to divest, to sanction. We have our responsibility to constantly make dua for them, to constantly speak out for them, to educate ourselves on what's happening, on the evictions that are happening over there, on the constant oppression, the ethnic cleansing that is happening in Palestine, in Palestine, by the Israelis. We have that responsibility, but still, regardless of how bleak the situation looks, we never lose hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We never lose faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We stay the course, we keep up the hope, we keep up the faith. Wallahu ghalibun ala amri. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's promise will come true. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's promise will come true. We need to stay our course, we need to do our responsibility. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم.